In the New Testament, there are 3 short narratives about a woman named Mary, and there's one thing in common with every story. Every time we find Mary, she is at a particular place. It's going to be very important to you to find out just where she was. I want to talk to you about Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. And there's actually 3 short narratives in the Gospels that talk about Mary. And it's interesting because in each of these stories that she's in, there's one thing in common. Every time we find Mary mentioned in the Scripture, she's at the feet of Jesus. In all 3 of those stories, that's where Mary is. And there are 3 great lessons for us in these stories regarding times when it's important for us to come to the feet of Jesus. And I want to talk to you about those. Number 1, Mary shows us to come to his feet in order to hear his word. To hear his word. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. Now it happened as they went that he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me. Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part which will not be taken away from her. So Mary here is sitting at the feet of Jesus to listen to him speak. And there's quite a contrast between Mary and her sister Martha in this particular story. And obviously Mary made the superior choice in this instance. But before we get too down on Martha, let's consider a few things about her. The story opens up and it says that this took place in Martha's house. All right, being that it was her house, she would have felt a certain responsibility to, prepare and to provide for Jesus and the disciples, in an adequate way. Now for me, I tend to, ask people to come over sort of at the drop of a hat. And if you come over, it's like, hey, let's see what we got. Hey, awesome, we got some cheese. Look at this, there's a half a jar of olives. You look over there, crackers, awesome. Hey, if you're thirsty, just check out the fridge, there's probably something in there. Janet, on the other hand, being her house, she's like, Bayless, I love people coming over, but you've got to give me some warning, like 24 hours. Because she wants to vacuum, and she wants to have all the special plates sit out, and she wants to light candles, and she wants to have the cheese all cut on a special little cheese platter, and have the drinks all out on the counter. She just feels this, responsibility when she's hosting at her home. Now, I know it's my house too, but I'm a little more casual. Many of you ladies in here will understand perhaps what Martha was thinking. And then on top of that, Jesus didn't travel alone. She has to prepare a meal for no less than 13 men, and there may have been others included. It would have been very expensive, but she doesn't mind. She's apparently a very generous woman. She doesn't chafe at the cost of having to serve an expensive meal. And as we read the story, apparently Martha, at least for a little while, was listening to Jesus as well, but she was pulled away. The way it says it, that she had a sister called Mary who also sat at Jesus' feet. But then it says, but Martha was distracted by much serving, and the word distracted literally means to be pulled away. So Martha may have been sitting there listening to Jesus, but she was pulled away, distracted, notice, by much serving. It's a good thing to serve, but not at the cost of having a lean soul. She wasn't just serving, but she was overoccupied. She was distracted by much serving. And then Martha approaches him, and again, the language indicates that it was fairly abrupt and explosive. She actually sort of explodes, interrupts Jesus while he's teaching, tells him he doesn't care, and then starts bossing him around. Lord, don't you care? My sister has left me to serve alone. You tell her to help me. So she interrupts him and starts bossing him around. This is not a good thing to do with Jesus. Martha basically says, look, Mary's wrong, and Jesus, you're wrong too. I'm burdened, and I'm not going to be happy until everyone else is just as burdened as I am. Now, I know I'm talking to a few people in here today. Just keep your face forward, and no one will know that we've just described you. Jesus says, Martha, Martha. You're always in trouble if the Lord says your name twice. He says you're worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed. And that should be the end of the sentence. You know, the original manuscripts have no punctuation. The punctuation is added by the translators for clarity. And most Greek scholars feel that the sentence should have ended with the word needed. You're distracted about many things, Martha, but one thing is needed, meaning that Jesus was saying, Martha, one dish is sufficient, rather than the many that you're anxious over. Martha, you've gone overboard in your serving, and you've got too many pots on the stove. A simple one-course meal would have sufficed, and then you would have had the time, just like Mary, to sit at my feet and hear my teaching. I wonder today how many of us have too many pots on the stove, too many irons in the fire, too many computer programs running all at one time, and it's keeping us from taking the time to sit at his feet and listen to him. Jesus' word to us today in this story is simplify. Simplify. I remember Harrison, our oldest son, who was up here a few minutes ago, when he was 10 years old. Now, he's always been gifted, athletically, and at that time, I think he was involved in 3 separate sports. And we have busy lives, and we always bring the kids to church Sunday night, Wednesday night, and, there's things going on. And for whatever reason, the teachers, when he's 10 years old, they felt that all the kids in their class need to be loaded down with a whole lot of homework every day. Now, I've never understood that. You've got them for 8 hours and you send them home with 2 hours of homework in addition to that every day. I don't know. But so he's got all these sports going on, busy church life, plus homework. And I walked into his room one day and he's sitting on the edge of his bed. He's got black bags under his eyes and he said, Dad, I'm so tired. I looked at him and said, poor kid, you're 10 years old and you're burned out. I said, Harrison, we're going to help you. We're going to help you make a decision. You're going to cut one of these sports. You can't be doing this many things. You need to simplify your life. And from that day on, we made a rule with all the kids as to how many sports they could be involved in. We wanted them to be involved, but they could only do so many things. And I think some of us need to examine our lives. Do you not have time to sit at Jesus' feet and open his word and say, Lord, just teach me. Speak to my heart. Are you pulled away and distracted? Do you have too many pots on the stove? You need to turn a couple of the burners off and maybe not have so many courses going on at the same time. Simplify. I have a friend that has worked for several large technical corporations. If I mentioned the companies, you would recognize them right away. And he hasn't been a lower level guy. He has been the top of the top in these companies. He's a technological genius. Not just understands things, but this guy's on the cutting edge that designs the things that we use daily. And there's sometimes he can't be reached. And I asked him one time, he said, well, Bayless, the reason I can't be is because I fast my gadgets from time to time. Every once in a while, I turn everything off so I can spend undistracted time with God, sitting at the feet of Jesus. You know, when we make that good choice like Mary, what we receive from the Lord cannot be taken away from us by men or by devils. Jesus said, Mary made the good choice, and it will not be taken away from her. We need to learn to sit at his feet, even if it means removing a few irons from the fire, stopping a few programs from running in our life, or taking a few pots off the stove. And then look with me in John chapter 12, if you would. We find Mary once again at the feet of Jesus, and by so doing, she's teaching us to come to his feet in order to worship him through giving. To worship him through giving. John chapter 12, verse 1. Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead, where he was. There they made him a supper, and Martha served. But Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. So Martha's happily serving. Verse 3, then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. But Jesus said, let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always. Once again, Mary is at the feet of Jesus, and the gift she is pouring out upon him is absolutely extravagant. 300 denarii. If you have a modern translation, many of them indicate that it was worth an entire year's salary. How much do you earn in a year? It was worth that, and she poured it out on the feet of Jesus. And I love this statement, the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. What a picture. Here she is, bowed at his feet, pouring out an extravagant gift on him, and the aroma of it is being diffused throughout the house. It reminds me of what Paul said to the Philippians regarding their extravagant, even sacrificial giving into the work of God. And I quote to you Philippians 4:18. Indeed, I have all and abound. I'm full, having received from Epaphroditus the things sent from you, a sweet-smelling aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well-pleasing to God. You can read about the Philippians. They were sacrificial and extravagant in their giving. And Paul said, listen, your act of worship and giving has arisen as a sweet aroma before God. You know, I spent all day Friday and good half the day yesterday just working on the message, praying and studying and talking to God. And Saturday, I'd been sitting in a little den area in our house for 7 or 8 hours, just praying and writing and thinking and reading this story. And I was on this particular point, and I'd been pondering it and reading it over and over. The house was filled with the fragrance, and the offering that the Philippians gave arose as a fragrance, a smell that was well-pleasing to God. And, you know, I've been by myself. Janet has no idea what I'm teaching. I haven't said anything to anyone. It's just been me and Jesus. And I'm in there pondering on this and reading the verses. I just read Philippians 4:18 again, and then thought about Mary, and all of a sudden Janet walks into the room with a stick of burning incense. It's actually called campfire incense. It smells like a campfire. It was one of my Christmas presents. I like the smell of a campfire. It's well-pleasing to me. And she walks in, she said, I thought you'd like this, and sets it down on the table in front of me. And so here's this aroma going up from the incense that's well-pleasing to me. She's never done anything like that in 32 years of marriage. And the moment that she brought it in was very significant. It was a token from God to me, and I recognized it. In fact, it was profound to me. Coincidental? No, friend, not coincidental at all. And when we bring our gifts to God in a heart of worship, when we come to the feet of Jesus, it rises as an aroma before God. It's a sacred thing. When you trade part of your life for a paycheck, it's time that you will never get back. That paycheck then represents part of your life. And when you, in a heart of worship, offer that to Jesus, friend, that arises as a sweet-smelling aroma before God, especially when the gift costs you something. You know, King David said this in 2 Samuel 24 and 24. He said, I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing. Now, Judas, who was the spokesman at this point of the disciples, was really upset. Now, his motives were far more sinister, but if you read the other Gospels, he wasn't the only one that was upset because of the extravagance of the gift. The other disciples were upset as well. In fact, in Matthew's account, they said, why this waste? Why has all this been wasted? Jesus indicated to them it was not a waste at all. My friend, whatever you bring to Jesus is not wasted. No extravagance is wasted upon God and His kingdom. You know, I have a friend, pastors a beautiful church. I preached in it a number of times. And the architectural style is quite different than our church, but it's very beautiful. And he was invited by a family to come over for dinner. And as they're sitting at the meal, the real reason for the invitation was revealed. They were upset because the church had just installed a big new beautiful chandelier. Now, a chandelier is not going to work here at Cottonwood, but it works at that church. Very different style. And they're griping and complaining about the waste of putting the chandelier in the church and the expense. And right above the dining room table where they're eating, there's hanging a beautiful, very expensive chandelier. Now you have to understand, my friend, he's the kind of guy you never have to wonder what he's thinking, because he's not hesitant to tell you. And he said, all right, it's good enough for you, but it's too good for God and for His kingdom and for His house. You can have one at your house, but it's too good for God to have one in His house. God needs something cheaper than you. And he said a few other choice things to them. You see, those that criticize extravagant givers put themselves in bad company. You put yourself in company with Judas. And Jesus said such extravagance was good, and it was in order as it was done in preparation for His burial. How much more when we give extravagantly in celebration of His resurrection? It was good, it was right to pour out extravagance in preparation for His burial. But friend, we are celebrating a resurrected Redeemer. How much more is it in order? You know, I know a couple that give generously and support God's work here and globally. They never treat it as a burden. It's never robotic or without passion. They're very serious about their giving, and God has given them influence over, a large amount of funds and given them a stewardship. And they delight in the giving. And the little that I know, I don't know much, but the little that I know, about the things they've supported and what they've given to, they hold a deep sacredness and spirit of worship about their giving. They do it in faith, and they consider it a holy thing, and their hearts are very, very connected to what they do, and so should it be with us. When we bring our gifts to God's work, may we bring them to the feet of Jesus in a heart of worship and say, God, here's the portion of my life that I traded for this, and I willingly offer it to you, that will arise as a sweet aroma that brings pleasure to our God. And then look with me in John chapter 11 as we come to the final narrative that includes Mary. We find her once again at the feet of Jesus, where she teaches us that we need to come to his feet with our questions and with our needs. Now I want to read quite a few verses from John, so just follow along, beginning at verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. In the Greek language, actually, it's in a progressive form. It says he was sick and getting sicker. He was spiraling downward, basically, is what the original language, that's the message that it gives. And it was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after this, he says to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and you're going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. These things he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. And Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who is called Twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. So when Jesus came, he found that he'd already been in the tomb 4 days. Now at this point, Martha comes out. They have a very important conversation, but we don't have time to get into it. So we're just going to jump in the story to where Mary comes out. Verse 32. Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. And some of them said, could not this man who had opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there's a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. So we find Mary once again at the feet of Jesus, but this time she's in agony. You can hear the pain and the questioning in her voice. She's hurt. She's confused. She has questions. But you know what? She doesn't run away from the Lord at this time. She runs to Him. And she falls at His feet. And so should we, especially when we don't understand. Maybe it seems to you that God didn't show up. Something happened, you don't know why. It's like, God, you could have. Where were you? Did you care? Why didn't you intervene? Don't let that drive you from the Lord. Be wise like Mary and come to His feet.
Bayless will continue with part 2 of his message next week.
Though we didn't have all the time in this program to give the full teaching to you, the truth is we must come to the feet of Jesus with our questions and with our needs. I don't have a theology that requires me to have all the answers before I believe that God is good. I believe that He is good even when I do not understand. And I come to Him with my questions. And when I feel confused, and you know what? He is a meter of needs. We can come boldly to the throne of grace and obtain mercy and find help in our time of need. Come to Him now. You'll not be disappointed.
I still remember his message about the 5 P's. And one P was play. He said, yeah, golf saved my life. And he said, I like to see explosions. And I really loved that. And I could remember that. I mean, he's in explosions himself. Yes. Even tonight, it was awesome. The people, they want to be radical for Jesus. But you know, we need to really push that boundaries because we are all very sleepy. But in our heart, we want to be radical for Jesus.
We really felt that God was breaking through something. Heaven was open, and that's what it's all about. People were touched, people got saved. And I think it's always great because we think globally, and we want to go, for everything. And so it's always great for pastors to connect and to get to know other pastors. And that's why we think it's a good thing to let him go, to get inspired, to get new vision, and bring that back into church.
What you've just seen is a small glimpse of some of what God is doing around the world through the Answers broadcast. Those of you that support what we're doing, I want to say thank you. And to those of you that perhaps haven't supported us, please pray about it. The Apostle Paul said, I desire fruit that abounds to your account. Friend, all of the lives that are touched, all of the souls that come into the kingdom, they literally go to your account when you support God's work. And what you've seen, just a tip of the iceberg. We'll never truly know till we get to heaven all that God has done. So thank you for supporting Answers.
Thank you for watching Answers with Bayless Conley.